Hi, my name is Karina Okidal. I'm the managing editor of Canadian Auto Dealer, and I'm here with Jeremy Vianna, head of automotive at Twitter. Um, so we're talking to Jeremy today because we've noticed that, as everybody else in the industry may have noticed, virtual events are very much a thing now. In-person events have shifted due to lockdown measures throughout the country. So OEMs, dealerships, all these events, NADA in the US, it all went to an online platform, which means that social media presence, social engagement has likely been up. Now, Jeremy, are you able to speak to this and actually back this up with any data and let me know what's happening in Canada in terms of these events?
Absolutely. Why don't I set some context first before we dive into the actual data? I think, the context is, of course, people are not able to go to live events anymore. And that is creating different ways that we consume experiences that people still want to be part of, whether they be auto events, whether they be sports events, whatever those things are. And so firstly, you're seeing a shift in those consumption habits. And that's an important thing to kind of be mindful of. We're seeing that in our platform. We recently, we had an earnings call last month, and we're seeing 27% growth in our user base on the platform. So just taking a step back, you're seeing large swells of a new digital population of people that are showing up and consuming content online in ways that they haven't before. And that has implications for the automotive industry. When one thing we were seeing is Twitter in general sense is the conversational layer of the internet. It's the place people come to talk in the public square. And we see with automotive conversations, for example, there's been a 14% increase in Q4 relative to Q3, which is a significant growth in people showing up and talking about automotive in various ways. And that's really interesting because when you think about Twitter as a looking glass, as an advertiser, as a dealer, it provides insight into what consumers are thinking in that consumer mindset. And so, we ask questions of our user base on what's the first big purchase you think you might buy when this is all behind us in some way. And cars tend to be one of the primary things that show up as an answer. Vacations are another important one. I think that would definitely be near and dear to my heart. The interesting thing, though, is that even if you look in January, we're seeing a significant lift in conversation. Just in that first month of this year, it's up 21%. And so the question starts to become, well, what does that mean and why is that happening? And part of that is on one hand, if you look at the Twitter story, right now, we had an analyst day last week. We talked about all of the new features that are coming on platform. There's excitement from a consumer perspective that's driving engagement on the platform. So that's, in its most direct way shown in the numbers, but it really is shown by things like spaces and the new features we're rolling out on the platform that are getting people to come and commune in ways that they hadn't before. And smart advertisers are cognizant of that. They're trying to align themselves with that. And there's two things that Twitter is used for by brands in general, but by automotive in specific. The first thing is launching something new into the world, and the second thing is connecting with culture, connecting with what's happening. And those are perfectly suited jobs for automotive brands, for dealers, and so on. I mean, you think about a new car launch. How do you drive mind share? Well, one of the primary ways of driving mind share is talking to a receptive audience that's leaned in, is news seeking, and wants to share things. So thinking about using Twitter as a place to amplify messages around a new car launch, it's a natural hand in glove fit. And that's where Twitter really shines, and where we shine in particular in the automotive space, having this enhanced, this amplified conversation that's happening already. The second part is, and this is where the auto show starts to become really interesting, is this idea of connecting with culture. One of the things we've seen is that 41% of brands that show up on the platform are viewed as more culturally relevant by our users than those that don't. And why is that important? Well, cultural relevance informs purchasing decisions. I mean, at its simplest level, being culturally relevant, being seen as being part of trends and causes and so on, and being meaningfully part of those things go a long way into the purchase path, into influencing the purchase path long term. So this is why we're seeing OEMs show up now and do a couple of things on the platform that are really fascinating. One is new vehicle launches. And we were already seeing this happen before we all went into a pandemic. We were seeing live events be amplified in an online way so that you could attract a larger audience. We saw this with Ford, with the Mach-E launch. That feels like 10 years ago, but I assume it was only a year and change ago before the pandemic. So, they leveraged it really well to have both to brew a conversation and then to sustain and have audiences that they could target and that they could communicate with over a longer period of time. But then we've also seen launches happen that have been only during the pandemic. GMC with their Hummer, as an example, is a great example of a launch that was incredibly successful. They sold out their pre-sales immediately, and it was largely driven by activations that were happening on Twitter. And let's unpack the Hummer one really quickly, because I think it's interesting in that it happened only in the pandemic. What's really fascinating there, beyond its sort of commercial success, is the Hummer is an iconic vehicle in some ways, and that means that there's a lot of conversation around it, and both good and bad. I mean, the Hummer is both a fascinating vehicle unto itself. It carries a legacy of being the large vehicle, sort of the vanguard of large SUVs, and that creates conversation. There are a lot of people talking about that vehicle on the platform already before the launch even happened. And so a team that's smart knows how to inject themselves in that conversation can go a long way in terms of amplifying the reach of their launch. And that's really where I think Twitter sort of sits at that intersection of helping marketers and helping dealers get their message out in a great way.
That's interesting. So, I mean, dealers could stand to really boost their engagement and spread their message more by utilizing Twitter as much as they can, especially amid the pandemic. I think that's pretty clear. Right?
Yeah, I think that the dealer side is really fascinating, because here we are now in a forced shift to engage with our customers in a far more digital way than we ever have in the past. And when we think about this, we think about how do you create a seamless experience that sits both digitally and in maps as customers come to your dealership, whether they be to kick the tires on a possibly new car, whether it be to come for service, whatever it might be. This experience, we would want it to be, we want to create it as seamless as possible. And when we do research on our platform and ask our users, there's a huge appetite for digitally led experiences that basically make that process more seamless, make it feel more safe. For example, being able to book online and all those types of things. And what's interesting for the dealer community here is you can actually look at what the people in your neighborhood or the patch in which you're working and see what people are saying about the experience they're having with your dealership and what they're saying about the comfort they feel and the service level that they're receiving and so on. And that insight's really helpful. I mean, one thing we often tell our partners is, this is a mechanism, you can use Twitter as a mechanism to understand what people are saying about you when you're not around in some ways. And they're saying it regardless, right? And so this is a really powerful weapon, I think, in some respects, in the service and marketing arsenal of dealerships.
So I guess my other question for you then is, I agree, yes, it could be a very powerful weapon, a tool for them. Now, do you foresee, based on the data, that this shift towards social will continue, this engagement with consumers, even post-pandemic? Is this something you see continuing for quite a while,
Yeah.
Or do you think maybe it might?
I think that's a great question. And I think, that's certainly something, if I were an automotive event organizer, I would be thinking, okay, wait, are we suggesting that events will be digital forever? And I certainly hope no. I mean, the answer is I don't think that's the case. I do think, though, that we've crossed a bridge in some respects, though, that for an event to exist exclusively in person, I think we won't see that in the same way that we've seen it before. I do think there will always be a digital layer that sits around, whether it be a brand new car launch, whether it be an auto show, to provide a window in it so that people who can't attend or don't want to attend, frankly, can actually find their way in. So let's go back to cultural relevance for a second. So we know that, for example, 41% of users view cultural relevance as a primary driver for brands. And so that's not going to go away. And so if we take away the social media, will things stay in social media? That's almost in some respects not actually the conversation. The conversation is, how does automotive remain as culturally relevant as it's always been, and frankly, as it was in its heyday? And the best way for that to happen is for automotive brands, for dealers, for auto shows even, to be present on the platform in such a way that they're part of the public conversation. And so, we have a large underpinning of data. For example, we know that 28% of our users they're very passionate about culture in a general sense. They believe it's an important driver in the way that they perceive the world and perceive brands. So with that said, that's not going to go away. The more and I sort of think about that. And so I think a great auto show in the future will be all the things it was, beautiful cars staged wonderfully, the ability to go in and touch and feel the experience of the vehicle. In some ways, that is going to be, needed by auto enthusiasts all the way to your average consumers. But being able to experience it, have a conversation about it, dive deeper into the features of the car that maybe aren't apparent physically, those are things that I think digital platforms and Twitter in particular are always going to be able to help with in ways they haven't been used in the past. I definitely think this is not we don't turn back at the end of the pandemic, I guess would be my general thought.
And so what would be your parting words then to dealers who are watching this video?
My parting thought would be, if you're not part of the conversation, you're missing out. And I think there's lots of different ways to engage, but if you don't fool yourself to think the conversation's not happening. And I think we've seen some dealer groups that are absolutely, incredible in the way that they show up on platform, the way that they think about post-sale service, the way that they think about customer service in a general sense, and do a really great job. And building off what the OEMs and the brand level marketing is already doing. And so I think that's an incredibly essential thing to take away from this, because these conversations are happening. Your audience, your consumers are sitting on platform, kind of waiting for you to show up. And so I think that is definitely something that I would encourage, really anybody with a desire to attract consumers to their shop to think about how to become better in that way. Something we're every day we're trying to help every brand we talk to get better at this.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. And I wish you and your family good health and safety during this period.
Thanks very much. You as well.